Gray's thumb hovers over the trigger. The Messerschmitt fills his gun sight. He shoves the stick forward. The Spitfire's nose drops into the dive, and the Merlin engine dies. Black smoke trails from the cowling. The propeller windmills to a stop. The Messerschmitt escapes across the channel. Gray pulls the canopy back and bails out over Kent, watching his beautiful fighter cartwheel into a field below. He has no idea what just killed his engine. Neither does anyone else. But in 3 months, this won't happen anymore. This is the story of how a motorcycle racer who rebuilt engines at 14 solved the problem that was killing RAF pilots faster than German bullets, and how the male engineers who dismissed her solution as too simple would watch it save the Battle of Britain. March 1940. Royal Aircraft Establishment, Farnborough. Beatrice Schilling stands in a hangar staring at a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine mounted on a test stand. She's 31 years old, 5'2", grease under her fingernails, a master's degree in mechanical engineering from Manchester, and a Brooklands Gold Star for lapping that circuit at 106 miles per hour on a Norton motorcycle she modified herself. The senior engineers call her Tilly. Some call her worse things. Women aren't supposed to be here. There are actual rules prohibiting women from entering certain areas of the establishment. She ignores them. The Merlin is a masterpiece. A 27-liter V12, liquid-cooled, supercharged, 1,030 horsepower at takeoff. It powers every Spitfire and Hurricane defending Britain. And it's killing pilots. The reports started during the Battle of France. Spitfire pilots chasing Messerschmitt Bf 109s. The German pushes forward into a dive. The British pilot follows. The Merlin coughs, sputters, dies. Black smoke. The German escapes. Sometimes the engine restarts after a few terrifying seconds. Sometimes it doesn't. By July 1940, during the opening weeks of the Battle of Britain, the pattern is unmistakable. Every dogfight that goes into a -G dive costs the RAF pilots. Either they lose the enemy, or they lose their engines, or they lose their lives. Schilling has read every pilot report. She knows what's happening before she even looks at the carburetor. It's the float chamber. It has to be. The Merlin uses a dual-choke SU carburetor. Standard equipment. Reliable in normal flight. The principle is simple. Fuel sits in a float chamber. A float controls a needle valve. When the fuel level drops, the float drops. The needle valve opens. More fuel flows in. Perfect equilibrium. Perfect for straight and level flight. Perfect for climbs and turns. Catastrophic in a dive. When the pilot shoves the stick forward, -G force throws fuel to the top of the float chamber. Away from the jets. The engine starves. If the pilot holds the dive, the fuel collects at the top. The float drops to the bottom of the chamber. The needle valve opens completely. Fuel floods the carburetor. The supercharger drowns in an over-rich mixture. The engine cuts out completely. The German Bf 109s don't have this problem. Their Daimler-Benz DB 601 engines use direct fuel injection. The injection pumps maintain constant pressure regardless of aircraft attitude. A Messerschmitt can push into a vertical dive at full throttle. A Spitfire cannot. RAF pilots have learned to compensate. Instead of pushing into a dive, they half-roll first. Roll inverted, then pull back on the stick. This keeps positive G on the aircraft, keeps the fuel where it belongs. But it takes precious seconds. Seconds the German pilot uses to escape across the channel. Back to France. Back to fight another day. Complaints flood into fighter command. Squadron leaders write urgent reports. Air Vice Marshal Hugh Dowding, commander of RAF Fighter Command, demands a solution. Rolls-Royce begins work on a complete redesign. A pressure carburetor that won't be affected by -G. Their engineers estimate 18 months, maybe 2 years. 2 years of German pilots exploiting this weakness. 2 years of RAF pilots dying because they can't chase an enemy into a dive. Schilling doesn't have 2 years. She doesn't think the RAF has 2 months. She spends a week studying the carburetor, taking measurements, running calculations. The float chamber holds approximately 150 cubic centimeters of fuel. In straight flight, the engine consumes about 90 cubic centimeters per minute at combat power. The margin is tight by design. Too much fuel in the chamber creates weight. Too little creates starvation during high G turns. The problem isn't the float chamber. The problem is what happens to the fuel during negative G. It floods the carburetor faster than the engine can burn it. What if she could restrict the fuel flow? Just enough to prevent flooding. Not enough to starve the engine during normal operation. She does the calculations. The Merlin at combat power, 2,850 revolutions per minute, plus 6 pounds of boost, consumes approximately 1.5 cubic centimeters of fuel per second. During a negative G dive, the carburetor can flood at rates exceeding 4 cubic centimeters per second. The difference is 2.5 cubic centimeters per second. That's what she needs to restrict. She sketches a simple disc, a brass washer, a small hole in the center. Place it in the fuel line between the feed pipe and the carburetor inlet. Calculate the hole diameter to allow maximum fuel flow for combat power. Nothing more. If the carburetor tries to flood, the restrictor limits the flow. The float chamber can't fill faster than the engine consumes fuel. No flooding. No rich cutout. She shows her calculations to the senior engineers. They're skeptical. A brass washer? That's the solution? Where's the sophisticated engineering? Where's the complex redesign? She explains the fluid dynamics, the flow rates, the pressure differentials. They're not convinced. One suggests she doesn't understand the complexity of the problem. Another points out that she hasn't even considered inverted flight. She hasn't. Her restrictor won't allow sustained inverted flight. It's not supposed to. It's supposed to keep the engine running during a 3-second combat dive. That's all the pilots need. She takes her design to Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding. He listens. He asks questions. He understands. He gives her authorization. Test it. If it works, install it. Immediately. Late March 1941. RAF Farnborough Test Facility. A Spitfire Mark II sits on the tarmac. Merlin 12 engine. Fresh from the factory. Schilling has spent the previous night machining prototypes. Brass discs. Various hole diameters. 0.035 inches. 0.040 inches. 0.045 inches. She needs to find the exact size that allows maximum power without allowing flooding. The test pilot is skeptical. He's heard about the restrictor. He's heard the other engineers laugh about it. A brass washer. He climbs into the cockpit anyway. The first test is straight flight. Full throttle. The engine performs perfectly. 2,850 revolutions per minute. 6 pounds of boost. No loss of power. The pilot flies a series of combat maneuvers. Turns. Climbs. Rolls. Everything normal. Then the dive. The pilot climbs to 15,000 feet. Levels off. Pushes the stick forward. Hard. The Spitfire's nose drops toward the ground. Negative G. The pilot's body lifts against the straps. For 3 seconds he waits. Waits for the cough. The sputter. The dead engine. It doesn't come. The Merlin roars. Perfect power. He pulls back on the stick. The Spitfire climbs. The engine never missed a beat. He lands. Climbs out. Finds Schilling. The other engineers have gathered. He tells them it works. It actually works. Some of them don't believe it. How can a brass washer solve a problem Rolls-Royce can't fix? But the test data doesn't lie. No power loss. No flooding. No cutout. Schilling runs more tests. Different dive angles. Different speeds. Different power settings. The restrictor works every time. Not perfectly. It doesn't allow sustained negative G. It doesn't allow inverted flight for more than a few seconds. But it gives pilots what they need. 3 to 5 seconds of negative G dive without engine failure. Enough to follow a Messerschmitt down. Enough to line up the shot. Enough to fight on equal terms. By early March 1941, Schilling has refined the design. The final version uses a 0.040-inch hull. Simple, cheap to manufacture, easy to install. No need to remove the aircraft from service. A mechanic can install the restrictor in 15 minutes. Unscrew the fuel line union. Slip the brass thimble into place. Tighten the union. Done. Dowding gives the order. Equip every fighter in RAF Fighter Command. Immediately, Schilling loads a small truck with restrictor kits, brass thimbles, installation instructions. She drives from base to base. RAF Hornchurch, RAF Biggin Hill, RAF Tangmere, RAF Duxford, every fighter station in southern England. At each base, she demonstrates the installation. The mechanics watch. Some are enthusiastic. Some are doubtful. All of them install the restrictors. The pilots hear about it within hours. Miss Schilling and her brass washer. Some call it the RAE restrictor. Most call it something else. Sir Stanley Hooker, the Rolls-Royce engineer responsible for Merlin superchargers, coins the name that sticks. Miss Schilling's orifice. The pilots love it. The name spreads through fighter command. The Tilly orifice. Mrs. Schilling's orifice. Some names are less polite. Miss Tilly's diaphragm. References to birth control. References that would make any proper engineer blush. Schilling doesn't care. The pilots are using it. That's what matters. By late March 1941, the installation is complete. Every Spitfire, every Hurricane, every Merlin-powered fighter in RAF Fighter Command carries Miss Schilling's orifice in its fuel system. The difference is immediate, measurable, undeniable. April 1941. Over the Channel. Flight Lieutenant James Gray pursues a Messerschmitt Bf 109E. The German pushes into a dive. Gray follows, shoves the stick forward. Negative G. His body lifts against the straps. The Merlin roars. No cough, no sputter. The Messerschmitt fills his gun sight. Gray fires. 8 Browning machine guns hammer. The Messerschmitt trails smoke. Rolls inverted. Falls into the channel. Gray pulls up. His hands are shaking. Not from fear. From disbelief. For the first time, he's followed a Messerschmitt into a dive without his engine quitting. For the first time, the Spitfire can fight on equal terms. The combat reports change. Before March 1941, RAF pilots consistently report enemy aircraft escaping by diving away. After March 1941, those reports drop sharply. Messerschmitt pilots can no longer rely on the dive-and-escape tactic. Spitfires can follow them down. The tactical balance shifts. The numbers are harder to quantify. How many pilots survived because of Miss Schilling's orifice? There's no way to know precisely. No official count. But pilots know. Mechanics know. Squadron commanders know. The device works. It saves lives. It gives the RAF a fighting chance. Some historians later estimate that the restrictor may have saved hundreds of lives. Others are more conservative. They note that precise statistics don't exist. What exists are the combat reports, the pilot testimonials, the undeniable fact that after March 1941, RAF fighters could perform negative G dives without engine failure. That capability alone changed countless combat outcomes. The restrictor isn't perfect. Rolls-Royce engineers still work on the pressure carburetor. Pilots still can't fly inverted for extended periods. The restrictor allows 3 to 5 seconds of negative G, sometimes a bit more, but sustained negative G still floods the engine. Inverted flight still cuts power after about 10 seconds. It's not a complete solution. It's a battlefield expedient, a temporary fix. But in war, temporary solutions that work immediately are worth more than perfect solutions that arrive too late. The German pilots notice. Intelligence reports indicate Luftwaffe pilots are briefed about the change. The Spitfire can now dive. Tactics must adjust. The psychological edge disappears. No longer can a Messerschmitt pilot confidently push into a dive knowing the British fighter can't follow. Now it's a fair fight. Miss Schilling's orifice remains in service for 2 years. March 1941 to early 1943. During that time, Rolls-Royce completes development of the Bendix-Stromberg pressure carburetor. Proper solution: direct fuel injection into the supercharger at 5 pounds per square inch. Completely unaffected by aircraft attitude. The new carburetors first appear in the Merlin 61, 66, and 70 series engines. By mid-1943, they're standard equipment. The brass restrictor becomes obsolete. Mechanics remove it during engine overhauls. Most are discarded. A few are kept as souvenirs. Small brass artifacts that once made the difference between life and death. Schilling continues her work at the Royal Aircraft Establishment. The restrictor is just one project among many. She works on the Merlin throughout the war, testing modifications, analyzing failures, solving problems. She contributes to dozens of improvements, none as famous as the brass washer. But each one matters. Each one saves lives. She also works on other projects. The Blue Streak missile in the 1950s. Research on wet runway braking characteristics. She even designs and builds a bobsled for the RAF's 1968 Winter Olympic team. Her expertise spans mechanical engineering. Her curiosity never stops. Her hands never stop building, testing, improving. In 1949, King George VI awards her the Order of the British Empire. The citation reads, "For services to aviation." It doesn't mention the brass washer. It doesn't specify her wartime contributions. Just services to aviation. The establishment doesn't like to draw attention to the fact that a woman solved a problem their best male engineers couldn't fix. But the pilots know. The mechanics know. RAF Fighter Command knows. Schilling never seeks recognition. Never writes memoirs demanding credit. Never appears on television claiming glory. She simply continues her work. In 1969, she retires from the Royal Aircraft Establishment after 33 years of service. She never reaches the top positions. Those remain reserved for men. Despite her technical brilliance, despite her proven record, despite saving countless lives, the ceiling exists. She knows it. She works beneath it anyway. Her personal life remains entwined with speed. In September 1938, she marries George Naylor, a fellow RAE engineer, also a motorcycle racer. There's a persistent story that she refused to marry him until he also earned the Brooklands Gold Star. The story is probably apocryphal, but it captures something true about her character. She doesn't compromise. Not for anyone. During the war, George serves as a bomber pilot with 625 Squadron RAF. Reaches the rank of flight lieutenant. Earns the Distinguished Flying Cross. He flies his missions. She fixes the engines. They both do their part. After the war, they continue racing. First motorcycles, then cars. An Austin Healey Sebring Sprite. An Elva 200 Formula Junior single-seater converted to a sports car. They tune the engines in their home workshop. Machine new parts. Push every vehicle to its limits. At Goodwood Circuit members' meetings, they score several podium finishes, even win outright at least once. Speed remains their shared language. In 1967, at age 58, Schilling helps American Formula One driver Dan Gurney solve overheating problems with his Eagle Mk1 racing car. Her reputation for solving impossible problems crosses the Atlantic. Gurney seeks her out specifically. She analyzes his car, finds the solution. The Eagle runs cooler. Gurney respects her expertise. In Formula One, respect is earned, never given. Schilling earns it. She continues racing into her 60s. At 64, She sets a motorcycle speed record, over 100 miles per hour. Again, the gold star never loses its meaning. The thrill of speed never fades. Beatrice Schilling dies on November 18, 1990, at the age of 81. She lives long enough to see her wartime contribution finally recognized. Historians write about her. The restrictor becomes known as one of the crucial innovations of the Battle of Britain. Pilots who flew with it speak publicly about its importance. The story spreads. Today, her legacy persists. A pub in Farnborough bears her name, the Tilly Schilling, RAF themed. A plaque outside commemorates her achievement. In 2019, Royal Holloway University opens the Beatrice Schilling Building, home to their Department of Electronic Engineering. Her birthplace, Waterlooville, erects memorial plaques, libraries, public spaces, reminders that genius can come from anywhere, from anyone. The Brooklands Museum holds a collection of her racing badges and trophies, physical evidence of her fearless pursuit of speed. The gold star hangs among them, hard-earned, never forgotten. What makes Beatrice Schilling's story remarkable isn't just the brass washer. It's what the brass washer represents. The best solution isn't always the most complex solution. Sometimes the answer is elegantly simple. A precisely calculated hole in a brass disc. But finding that simple solution requires deep understanding, requires knowing exactly how much fuel the engine needs, exactly how fast the carburetor floods, exactly where to restrict the flow without starving the engine. That understanding only comes from obsessive attention to detail, from years of rebuilding engines at 14. From racing motorcycles and needing to understand every component. From refusing to accept that a problem is too complex to solve. The male engineers dismissed her solution because it looked too simple. They wanted sophisticated redesigns, complex mechanisms, proof of serious engineering. They couldn't believe a brass washer would work. They were wrong. The brass washer worked because Schilling understood the problem better than they did. She didn't need to prove her engineering credentials with complexity. She needed to solve the problem. Fast, cheaply, reliably. She did all three. There's another lesson. Schilling faced obstacles her male colleagues never encountered. Rules prohibiting women from certain areas. Skepticism about her abilities. Sexist comments in job interviews. Denied promotions despite proven excellence. She persisted anyway, not because she was superhuman, because she loved the work, because problems needed solving, because pilots needed help. She didn't let barriers stop her. She found ways around them, or through them, or she simply ignored them. The story also reminds us of timing. Rolls-Royce's pressure carburetor was the better solution, more complete, more sophisticated. But it took 2 years to develop. Schilling's restrictor took 2 weeks. In March 1941, 2 weeks was the difference between winning and losing the Battle of Britain. Perfect solutions that arrive too late are useless. Good solutions that arrive immediately save lives. Schilling understood that. She chose to solve the problem now rather than perfectly later. Finally, there's the question of recognition. Schilling received an OBE. Her name appears in history books, but she never received the public acclaim other inventors enjoyed. No knighthood, no major awards, no headlines during the war. Her contribution remained classified, secret, unknown to the public. Even after the war, recognition came slowly, grudgingly. The establishment didn't want to admit that a woman had solved their problem. Only decades later, as historians uncovered the full story, did her achievement receive proper acknowledgement. By then, she was in her 70s. She never complained, never demanded credit. She knew what she'd done. The pilots knew. That was enough. Somewhere over England, in a museum or private collection, there might still exist one of those original brass restrictors. A small thimble-shaped piece of metal, corroded now, insignificant to look at, But once upon a time, that tiny piece of brass kept a Merlin engine running during a 3-second dive, kept a pilot alive, kept a Spitfire in the fight, changed the outcome of a battle, maybe changed the course of a war. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. If you want to hear more forgotten chapters of history, subscribe and hit the bell icon. Drop a comment telling us which WW2 story you want to hear next.